Morning, my people. Father Power here again. Yes, we'll go through the Emancipation Day and the Independence Day, and you know, we see several things. We see Mark Wallen decides, you know, he must show up, but him now wearing a green. Him now go wear the colors that represent the flag. Some gold, a little black, but him now wear the green. Money I support the thing a portion of the way. But we approaching that election day, and we continue to reason with the people to see what is their idea, what is their plan, what is their thinking. Are people thinking about just the election, as in my party, just want my party win? Are we beginning to look and realize that this is not about party anymore? As a matter of fact, you know what? I need to clear, make a statement. I too find myself moving away from this whole concept of party because as I continue to look back at the history and see where it is went wrong, I think I see it. Went wrong when on the birth of the nation we decided that we were going to jockey for position. At the birth of the nation, what we should have done, in the same way in which we had worked together from 19, even before 1944, the way we had worked together while still under colonial rule, we worked together to move the country forward. It is that moving forward that allowed us in 1962 to be able to have something, you know, something to work with, something to step out on our own. But at that time, what we failed to realize is that, you know, it's like you in your parents' house, you understand me? And you have a job. And, you know, you come in and you decide, say, boy, I'll bring up bread, or, you know, you contribute to the thing in a small way. Mark you. It's only in a small way, just making a contribution. You're not responsible for the mortgage. You're not responsible for the electricity. You're not responsible for the water. You're not responsible for the overall maintenance, management of that house. Then you move out and you want to do the same things that you were doing before. Because when you're in your parents' house, you make a contribution and then the rest of your money is your money to spend how you see fit. But when you moved out to your parents' house and move into your own place, the rest of your money is not for you to spend it as you see fit. Because now you have to pay rent or mortgage if you are doing such a good job, right? You're now responsible for the electricity and the water and the maintenance. Yes. So them old party where you used to go and them everything else when you see with something and you want to buy it, yeah, you can't do that no more because now you have real responsibilities. And that is what I believe happened in 1962. In 1962, when we got independence, we were operating in a way like, you know, a way around the thing. But this time in 1962, we had the responsibilities where the government now had the responsibility of the people. And many of the shortcomings would not have shown up because, like with any, you know, situation, you leaving home, you got some gifts, you know. Your father might have palm a little thing to you. Your mother give you a little thing wrap up and say, boy, she did a save this for you for when you step out on your own. Yeah. And so you started off in your new home, believing to yourself that, yeah, you got this. So there are those who say that, we were growing, but who weren't doing enough for the poorer class of people. What they're not looking at is that we were now responsible for everything. And we would have had to build, for instance, for to take into account create buffers. For instance, you might lose the job and still need to live somewhere. Or you may change jobs and you'll still have to figure it out. When the PMP came into power in 1972, they had a lot of ideas. The problem was they had not costed these ideas properly. And then they chose to get future earnings. Yes, and so, they decided that they were going to come with all these new policies, new things, but the costing of it was not done properly. So we decided to introduce the bauxite levy and collect this money in advance, not realizing that it was a short-sighted move because though we collected the money in advance, many of the companies decided to leave. And so, with the oil shocks of OPEC deciding that, boy, them will just turn up the thing on people, on the various countries, and increase the price of oil, we now had a limited setup, right? Limited setup. And this created a problem. And by the time we got to about 1976, we were recognizing that, oh, wow, we weren't really, we didn't have as much as we thought, and we're not as grown up as we thought. We were turning into what we used to call sparkler, bright burning, but quick fizzle. This was a problem. And so by the time we got to 1978, 79, we were really in a tough spot now. And as a result of the harshness and the difficulties, and then, of course, being wrong and strong, you're going to have a leader deciding that, hey, you can tell people that, there are 5 flights leaving a day and you can take one. Chasing out the very people that you needed. Because when that happens, that's capital flight. People who, you know, invest in the country, you're telling them they can't leave. And you're going in the direction of Cuba. No, nothing is wrong with their direction. That was their direction. But it didn't mean it was ours. You know? It's like you deciding, say, boy, you have a party with your friends. You have to hang out with your friends when you're supposed to go on to work. You gotta just chill out until the water get cut off and the light get cut off and the landlord are going bad for him rent because you're not paying me the last 3 months. I'm gonna put you out. This is what was happening. Enter the JLP again in 1980. And we go back to putting in the labor and rebuilding the thing. Instead of deciding to work with us, okay, let's go back to the old way of where we work together, recognize what was wrong, and realize that we need to work together. Because we hadn't introduced this whole business of elections and the trying to control scarce resources, there was never going to be any working together. And so in 89, just after we had Gilbert in 88, in 89, the people decided, say, oh, I want to change again. You know, I will go back to the PNP. What we didn't understand was that the PNP had a strategy. They had what was called a base. And what they do is while they're in power, they take care of the base. The base is not as big as the country. These are the same reasons why within our civil service and how this whole business of Pickersgill Committee worked. For those who were part of the base and who had their and who were loyal, you would reward them with housing, reward them with jobs and position. Yes. Was the productivity there? No. Because you learned of many people who had civil service job and that provided them with them housing in return for their loyalty, but it didn't necessarily mean that they had to do any work. Crash program, work crews just sitting around. Kind of like, oh, you pass any construction site, especially like in the US, or road work site. It seems like these guys are always at lunch. You wonder when they actually do the work. The difference, though, is that the work does get done because you didn't see the progress the next morning. I guess they took it literally about the heights of great men reach and kept was not attained by sudden flight, but they were their companions slept upward toiling through the night. And yes, it's easier to do things like road work in the night than under the glaring sun. But our people were not doing that. They were not working. You were holding positions, but you were not producing. But because you were loyal, you were able to get these benefits. And like I said, the party machinery is a small group when compared to the whole country. And so during the 80s, instead of figuring out how they were going to work, how we're going to work together, all the PNP were doing was plotting how they were going to get back into power. Got back into power, decided to free up the dollar, without having the resources to back it up. Of course, the dollar ran away. I remember, yeah, back in them times I had bought some shares in Jamaica producers. And when the dollar devalued, my shares was worth a considerable sum. But that considerable sum didn't mean much because everything else went up by a considerable sum. The inflation was out of control. And then, of course, you had the whole thing of people buying and selling dollars. That again caused the dollar to devalue and gave the merchant, with just cause, just reason, to increase the prices. And so we went through the 90s and the early 2000s in that frame of mind until the financial collapse. During that financial collapse, it was shown that it was just completely done. And after the GLP had finished their isms and schisms, they were able to get back in power in 2007. What that proved also to be short lived. Well, I mean, yes, short lived in a sense, because, and not very productive. Because here it is that the Prime Minister then, Bruce Golding, had to find himself fighting for his political life, all because of what was a devious act, which, for whatever reason, Jamaica need a truth and reconciliation. They need a truth and reconciliation because they don't talk about some of the things. And they have some people walking around and acting as if though they are, paragons of virtue. This business of the secret MOUs that were signed by Dr. Peter Phillips proved to be the undoing of Bruce Golding. Why? Because Bruce Golding did not know of their existence. How did he not know? Because those documents were never authorized by cabinet. And so there was no record of it. Where did they eventually find these documents? At Upper Camp, and not in the usual place where these documents go, which would be the Ministry of Justice. So here it is, he's taking a stance that a country can't just come and grab one of our own without knowing that, in fact, there was a memorandum of understanding, a MOU, that had been signed by the National Security Minister, Dr. Peter Phillips, but which was not known to cabinet. What did the PNP do? Turn around and claim basically that Bruce Golding was protecting one of their strongmen, area leader. But were they really doing that? Because if you ask the question, seeing that the PNP were in power for 18 and a half years, I would ask this question. When did Dudos come to prominence? During those 18 and a half years, he could not have gotten a single contract from a JLP. But the JLP were in opposition. If he got contracts, he would have had to get them from the PNP. And we don't know about the PNP just wanting to share contracts with non-PNP people. But most people just like look, don't pay no attention to that. And so Bruce Golding ends up fighting for his life, ends up having to resign and hand it over, the government over to Andrew Holness. Of course, Andrew Holness decided to listen. If I'm going to do this thing, I need the support. And of course, there was a little ism that was taking place in the PNP because there were those who were, sorry, ism in the JLP because there were those in the JLP who felt that they should have had the position. Hardly Shaw felt that he should have been party leader at one point. There was a runoff between him and Andrew Holness at conference. So here we go again. And while this is happening, the PNP are back in power. But of course, Andrew had told the people, bitter medicine, because things were in a bad state. The JLP were only in basically a term, 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years. And so they were not able to rebuild all that was decimated through the 18 and a half years of the PNP. Of course, Peter Phillips being held close by Sister P had to go to the IMF and realize that yes, it was going to be bitter medicine. And so they administered it. And at that point, this was when I guess they started the, not started, but continued what Audley Shaw was trying to do with the debt exchange and crafting some kind of, you know, financial framework so as not to have the government be able to basically wreck the finances of the country, taking the Bank of Jamaica out of the hands of the government and so on, make it a truly independent body. And then the PNP were not able to do much. And then, of course, once again, it shows that, their understanding of how to run a country wasn't really great because, what the government was doing under the PNP prior to Bruce Golding having won, that was a Ponzi scheme. And some may take affront to that statement. But what is the definition of a Ponzi scheme? You collected money from the people at the front to pay the people who going out the back door. Every time they went on the market to raise treasury bills, to issue treasury bills, Omar Davis was raising more treasury bills, paying a higher interest rate each time. And the banks, instead of lending to people, they were the ones willing to lend to the government. It was risk free. And when that one matured, we had to raise one the size of what was due to be paid plus some. Another word for that is kiting, where somebody writes a check and deposit that check with another institution. And you keep writing checks and depositing those checks. Basically, what you're running is an illegal overdraft. Banks frown upon things like that. So even if it wasn't a Ponzi scheme, it would have still fallen on the definition of kiting because you were simply floating money, running an illegal overdraft by simply writing a check from bank A to deposit into bank B. Then write a check from bank B to deposit to bank A to cover the check that's supposed to cash. You keep going. And of course, you need some money to spend, so you deposit more than you need, but you have to keep writing bigger checks each time. But unless something dramatic happens where you're able to come up with the funds to pay it all off, at some point it's going to implode because the bank is going to see what you're doing. Because they're always analyzing your account. And all they need to do to crash it is to hold on to one of the checks. Meaning when you deposit the check, you just don't clear it. When the next check hits, it's where the problem starts. So the only time that we have really worked together as a country, and it was not willingly, it started with a framework developed in 2007 by Ardal Shaw and Bruce Golding. It continued with Portia Simpson Miller and Dr. Peter Phillips because they had no choice. Not because they wanted to, but they had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. Nobody's going to lend us money. So we had to get our house in order. And in 2016, Andrew Holness and Nigel Clark continued and built, even with a slim one-seat majority. But that was because clearly the idea was, well, I guess they had no choice but to work together. COVID came in 2019, 2020, and knock off sometime, throw everything in array. But because of the strategies that they were putting in place, because they were creating these buffers, when COVID came, and because you had people who were thinking, not just reacting, and they were thinking, they were planning, they were to look beyond their nose, look down the road, were to make it through COVID. The election in 2020 didn't know how bad it was things were going to be, but they decided to hold the election in 2020. The people decided that, you know what, let's not change course, not during this, because these people seem to be managing, or they either look like they can't manage. And here it is now, we're in 2025, looking for the next election. And we're thinking to ourselves, what next? Where do we go? And this is why I said earlier in the conversation that I am parting ways with this tribalist mentality. Because if you are a tribalist, you are unable to call a spade a spade. And you're exercising your franchise purely against party colors or leanings. When in fact, the true project is really Jamaica. That's the project. It's Project Jamaica. That's what we started with. That's what we fought for from 44 until we got independent. We were fighting for Project Jamaica. We lost sight of that and went on a dalliance, an experimentation, a crash. We're back on track. This is our 1972 once again. Are we going to experiment or are we going to stay the course? I say stay the course. Let's see how much different it could be. We've got the macro economics sorted out. Let us now stay the course. Because what? We're not seeing people who are just flirting with ideas. We're seeing people who are implementing ideas. And unlike in the 60s, where they were just focusing on the growth of one side of the country, they have been trying to find that middle ground. Not perfect, but it's much better than what we did in the 60s. Growing the economy, but yet not leaving the vulnerable behind. I say, my view is that we stay the course. Stay the course. Give the current government another 5 years. And PMP, you need to sort yourself out. You need to get on the same page. You need to lock on yourself in a room and work out some ideas and strategies. And you need to really, just like when you use this whole thing with the Pickers Guild Committee, where you're looking for purebred socialists. No, look for purebred patriots, people who believe in doing the right thing for the country and who are not in it for political gain or personal gain. It must be for Jamaica's gain. I think you need to step back and use the next 5 years PMP to see how it is that we can work together. You know what I look forward to? I look forward to a day when the leader of the country can draw from the best minds, not based on what party you're in, but based on your ability to do the job. And we actually be done with this whole party business where everybody is an independent, but we can be independents and yet have a common theme. And the common theme is Project Jamaica. Choose Jamaica. What is good for Jamaica? And we'll never get something where it's 100% of the people because it's impossible to please all men. But if we can please the majority, if we can help the majority, if we can put in place systems that facilitate the majority, that should be the goal. That should be the goal moving forward. I'm looking at it now and I'm seeing where PMP people and JLP people are working together to move Jamaica forward, to ensure that Jamaica does not end up in the hands of those who would be tyrants, those who are only in this for themselves. But in fact, we are working together for the betterment of Jamaica, at least the majority of Jamaica. A system where business is not hindered or stifled, taxes are not burdensome, and those who need a helping hand can be offered one. Where education to the youth is available at no cost for them to get a skill if they did not excel in academics. Building out that workforce, reducing the crime, where people have something to do so they don't need to be thinking about how it is they're going to rob and steal and kill. Yes, that is Project Jamaica. That's what we're on now. Let us continue working towards that. Choose Jamaica.